Hello, everybody, and welcome to IT Problem Solving in a scripting context. Tell you what, on these little chats from here on out, I'm just going to say good morning, good evening, as in whenever I actually record it, and whenever you listen to it is how you listen to it. That's a good thing about an online course. Okay, we'll start talking about various problem-solving processes, one of which you learned in grade school. That's a scientific method, and that's how a particular phenomenon works. You have some very focused research devoted to that particular phenomenon. You form a guess, if you will, about how it works and find a way to test that, and you publish it. Then next thing you know, your name's up in lights and all that. Well, maybe not. Okay, there's an extension of that, and the extension is when you have a problem that's not so much how something works, but how to do something. For example, which mail server should we get for our company? That's an IT application. Which lawnmower should we get to our companies to keep the grass cut? That's another application and doesn't involve IT that I know of. So this staff study here, this is an Air Force and Army thing. This is how I made my bread and butter as a staff officer, because my superiors would come to me from time to time and say, figure out how to do this and brief me. Now, when all of these fails, you always have what's called the Monte Carlo method. Okay, outline of what I'm going to tell you. The application examples I'm going to give you for scripting is network chores, because that's what my background's in. The process, not a lot of surprises there. You may notice that I talk about deploy and manage lifecycle. That's what happens when you have to live with the consequences of your actions for 10 to 15 years. You start thinking in those terms because those come around again and again. Application example, my first one I worked on was from 2000 to 2009. They were network chores. Back then, the idea was better living through Access databases. Anybody had an idea, they go off and create them an Access database using Visual Basic for applications, and then everybody got to put stuff into their uh, database. Well, people didn't like putting names and all that good stuff into 15, 20 different databases, so the boss said, can you automate this? Also, we wanted to go into our human resources database. We wanted to automate the management of accounts on that, because I work for a military agency, and there's no fury like the fury of an ensign, which is the lowest ranking officer, when he gets promoted to Lieutenant JG, which is the next rank, and it doesn't show up in the address book. Okay, so we talk about Active Directory. Active Directory, we got Active Directory users and computers here. This is where your network admin goes to unlock you when you forgot your password again. No. And most of the time now you can't use passwords. You got to use two-factor authentication, but that's another course. Okay, take a look at Jeff here. Jeff is a user. Don't know much about Jeff except he's Jeff. Now, if we knew, we can learn all sorts of information. We have plenty of places to put all that information in here. Just on this tab, you got his last name, you got his description. I don't know how you describe Jeff, and Jeff may not know how you want to describe Jeff, but anyway, if we wanted to, we could put a description. We also put his office there if you want to go see him. Now, who does that anymore? But you can put his telephone number. That's kind of indefinite because most of us have several numbers. Well, it turns out there's a tab for telephones, so you can figure out which number is where. You got his email address. Again, that's another multiple choice proposition, but usually for an internal website or an internal network like this, he's got one particular email. And we got his web page if he decides he wants to have a web page. So I wrote an application, I wrote a script that created new Active Directory accounts, went into the human resources, see who checked on board, create them account, and create them a mail account. Another thing I managed to do was I did automatic emails for reminders for those things that everybody knows they're supposed to do, but they don't want to do. For example, that the lovely required training and physicals. So that was my first application. And I worked on it. You can see I worked on it from 2000 to 2009, and it just kind of grew and grew and grew. More on that later. All right, 2020, security compliance. Name of the game. Uh, There is a Defense and Information System Agency called DISA. The reason I wrote it out here on the text was this is about my fourth time recording it and forgetting what that stupid abbreviation stood for, so I wrote it out. Nobody calls it that. They call it DISA. DISA puts out what is called a Standard Technical Implementation Guide. I remember that one, and you see one of them down here. It's a whole list of rules you got to follow in order for your system to be secured in accordance to the Departments of Defense standard. You see, you got a check text where you got to go into the admin tool. You got to look here. You got to click here and check here. I said Dullsville. This is okay if you got one website or if you got one installation, but typically you may have several web servers and you may have tens and 20s of websites. This gets old. And when I say semi-automatic completion of this checklist, I have it now where it marks it, but it doesn't set that, and there's a little more on that later. This has to be able to tie into IIS, which is the Microsoft web server, and this is an XML document, so I had to go look up how that worked. Nice thing about this is it's allowed teleworking. I work on an isolated system. Most of the time you can't bring your work home with you. But what happened, since this is DISA, this is out on the internet, I went into Azure, I got a virtual machine, and I started setting and unsetting and running the PowerShell checks to see if it showed up in the script. Okay, we are now at the first part of the actual process. Define the problem. Okay, for BV script, the problem was to automate the transfer of information from the human resource databases to Active Directory and other auxiliary databases. And the reason I have the glasses there is it's real easy to state that looking back. I did not do that to start with. I just started hacking away at the problem. That leads to its own problems. A little more on that later. Now PowerShell, I started out with a purpose because I know better now. To automate the completion of IIS and SQL Server security checklist, and I have a little proviso on the one that I actually use that works as whenever cost feasible. Okay, some tips on defining the problem. It helps to use an infinitive form, which is to in the infinitive form of the verb, because what you want it to do is you want it to do something. For example, this is the case of my first project. Update the email humma 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 from the human resource database. Okay, synchronize photos between the human resource system and the building security system. That was interesting, but that was fun. Okay, to automate the completion and maintenance of IIS and SQL Server DISA checklist where cost effective. Notice I have that cost effective because you get to a point of diminishing returns in scripts, and I will caution you about that. Okay, one thing you want to do with scripts is you want to avoid stating the problems in terms of solution. There's this temptation when you get this new toy to go out and use it to try it for everything. It's like the Japanese saying that when all you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. For example, use Python to automate the network. Python is a wonderful language. We will be learning a little bit about this this course, but is it the best choice? And to determine whether it's the best choice, you kind of already answered your decision-making process. You've already decided this was a solution, and the question is what are you trying to automate? Automate is usually by the task. You don't say I want 10 pounds of automation. To use JavaScript to improve our website, I have no doubt that JavaScript can make websites run better. The question is what exactly are you trying to improve? And a little side note, do not fall in love with your tools because you'll end up being heartbroken. Okay, gather data. We will get a little bit about halfway through this, and then we'll take a break and we'll pick it up in the next presentation. Okay, problem details. This quantitative measure is important because if you're not careful, you'll spend more time on the script than you spend on the actual problem itself. This thing about global address, that's when you have an intranet and you have your own web server and it has its information in there. Well, normally in the old world, what happens is you would fill out a form every time somebody wanted something changed. It'd get routed to the IT department. They would change it and send the form back. We said, well, you know, if we can tap into the human resources database, which should be up to date, we can basically run that every 4 hours while people are here, and it'll be no more than 4 hours old. Okay, the other thing about the problem detail is who do you have to please? Who do you have to make happy with this? In our case, it was really easy because it was us. Okay, I will stop here and I will pick up here with the next recording.